The heavy iron key turned in the lock with a sound that shattered Olivia Ashford's last shred of hope, and she stood trembling on the wooden boardwalk outside Mrs. Henderson's boarding house as midnight bells tolled through the bitter February air of Valentine, Nebraska in 1882. Her carpetbag sat at her feet like a faithful dog, stuffed with everything she owned in this world, which amounted to 3 calico dresses, 2 threadbare nightgowns, a silver-backed hairbrush that had belonged to her mother, and the $14 she had left after paying for the stagecoach that had brought her west 3 weeks ago. The boarding house door stood closed against her now, as solid and unforgiving as Mrs. Henderson's face had been when she had knocked on Olivia's room an hour earlier and informed her that young unmarried women who failed to secure employment within their first month were not welcome to remain under her roof. Olivia had pleaded, explaining that the seamstress position she had been promised in a letter from her cousin had evaporated when she arrived to discover that Cousin Margaret had married a rancher and moved 50 miles north to work his homestead. She had offered to clean, to cook, to do laundry, anything to earn her keep for just another week while she figured out what to do. But Mrs. Henderson had a reputation to maintain, she said, and young women of uncertain prospects attracted the wrong sort of attention. She wanted Olivia out before the breakfast hour, and when Olivia had taken too long gathering her belongings, the landlady had grown impatient and hurried the process along. Now the street stretched empty before her, lit only by the yellow glow of oil lamps in windows where sensible people slept in warm beds. The temperature had dropped with the sun, and Olivia's wool coat, adequate for the mild winters of Ohio where she had grown up, felt as thin as paper against the prairie wind that swept down the main street of Valentine with nothing to stop it but her shivering frame. She picked up her carpetbag and started walking, though she had no destination in mind. The hotel would cost more than she could afford for even a single night, and she knew no one in this town well enough to knock on their door at this ungodly hour. Her breath came out in white puffs as she walked past the general store, the saloon where piano music and rough laughter still filtered through the batwing doors, the sheriff's office dark and quiet. Her fingers had gone numb inside her thin gloves when she heard the footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, heart hammering, and saw a tall figure approaching through the darkness. As he stepped into the light of a street lamp, she saw he wore a cattleman's hat, a long duster coat, and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. He stopped when he saw her face, and she noticed he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that reflected the lamplight like a wolf's. "You all right, miss?" His voice was deep and carried a note of genuine concern that made Olivia's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I'm fine, thank you." The lie came automatically, bred from years of her grandmother's instruction that a lady never burdened strangers with her troubles. He looked at her carpetbag, then at the boarding house behind them, then back at her face. "Mrs. Henderson throw you out?" Olivia felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. "That's none of your concern. It's midnight and freezing, and you're walking down the street with all your belongings. That makes it my concern." He shifted the rifle on his shoulder. "I'm Finn Fletcher. I work the Morrison Ranch about 10 miles east of here, came into town for supplies. I've got a room at the boarding stable, nothing fancy, but it's got a stove and a cot. You can have it for the night." "I couldn't possibly." The words came out more sharply than she intended, sharpened by desperation and pride warring in her chest. "Well, what's your plan then?" He did not say it unkindly, but the question hung in the cold air between them, demanding an answer she did not have. Olivia opened her mouth and found she had no words. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled like a riverbank in spring flood, and to her absolute horror, tears began streaming down her frozen cheeks. She turned away quickly, humiliated, but Finn Fletcher had already seen. "Hey now." He stepped closer, his voice gentler. "I didn't mean to upset you. Look, I know how this looks, a strange man offering his room to a woman he doesn't know. But I give you my word, on my mother's grave, that I mean you no harm. You can lock the door from the inside if it makes you feel safer. I'll sleep in the stable with my horse. I've done it plenty of times before when the weather's good, and tonight's not so bad once you get out of the wind." It's freezing, Olivia managed through her tears. I've got a good bedroll and extra blankets. My horse Copper keeps the stable warmer than you'd think. And there's fresh hay. I'll be more comfortable than you'd be out here on the street. He paused, then added, My mother was widowed young. I saw how people treated her, how hard everything was. I like to think someone would have helped her if she'd needed it. Something in his voice, a raw honesty that cut through her fear and suspicion, made Olivia look at him again. In the lamplight, she could see his face more clearly now. He had strong features, a straight nose, and a mouth that looked more accustomed to smiling than frowning. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into the sun, and a small scar through his left eyebrow. He looked tired but kind, and Olivia realized with a jolt that she was going to accept his offer because the alternative was freezing to death or worse. Just for tonight, she heard herself say. I'll find somewhere else tomorrow. Relief crossed his face. Good. Come on, it's just around the corner. She followed him down the dark street, acutely aware of how improper this was, how her grandmother would have fainted dead away at the very thought of her granddaughter following a strange cowboy to his room in the middle of the night. But grandmother was dead these 3 years, and propriety was a luxury Olivia could no longer afford. The boarding stable was a long, low building that smelled of horses, leather, and hay. Finn led her to a door at the far end, separate from the main stable but connected to it. He pulled out a key and unlocked it, pushing the door open to reveal a small room with a narrow cot, a pot-bellied stove that still held warmth from earlier, a wooden chair, and a small table. A lantern hung from a hook on the wall, and there was a window with actual glass covered by a faded curtain. It's not much, Finn said, lighting the lantern with a match from his pocket, but it's warm and dry. There's water in the pitcher there, and I've got some jerky and hardtack if you're hungry. Thank you. Olivia set her carpet bag down on the chair, feeling the warmth from the stove seep into her frozen limbs. I don't know how to repay you for this kindness. Don't need repayment, just glad to help. He moved toward the door, then paused. Lock this after I leave. If you need anything at all, just knock on the wall there. I'll be right on the other side in the stable. After he left, Olivia did lock the door, then stood in the center of the small room and let herself shake. Whether from cold or relief or the sheer overwhelming nature of everything that had happened, she could not say. She added wood to the stove from the small pile beside it, then sat on the cot and removed her gloves to hold her hands toward the warmth. Through the thin wall, she could hear Finn moving around in the stable, the soft nickering of his horse, the rustle of hay. She should have been frightened, alone in a strange place with only a door between her and a man she had just met, but somehow she felt safer than she had in weeks. There was something solid and trustworthy about Finn Fletcher, something that made her believe his promise had been genuine. She ate a little of the jerky he had left on the table, drank some water, then removed her coat and boots and lay down on the cot fully dressed. The blanket smelled of wood smoke and horses and something else she could not name, something masculine and not unpleasant. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought about the man sleeping in the hay on the other side of the wall, giving up his warm room for a stranger, and wondered what sort of person did such a thing in a world that seemed increasingly short on kindness. She woke to pale sunlight filtering through the curtain and the sound of voices outside. For a moment she could not remember where she was. Then memory returned in a cold rush. She sat up quickly, smoothing her hair and trying to make herself presentable without a mirror. Her reflection in the water pitcher showed a young woman with tangled auburn hair, green eyes still puffy from crying, and a face that looked older than her 22 years. When she opened the door, she found the stable busy with morning activity. Several horses stood in their stalls, and 2 men were hauling saddles and gear. Finn stood near the main entrance talking to an older man with a gray beard and a limp. When he saw her, he excused himself and walked over. In the daylight, she could see him more clearly. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked hard for a living. His dark hair was indeed too long, curling slightly at his collar, and his eyes were brown, warm, and direct. He had shaved at some point during the night, and she caught the faint scent of soap as he approached. "Morning," he said. "I hope you slept all right." "Better than I had any right to expect." Olivia hesitated, then asked, "Did you sleep at all?" "Sure, I'm used to bedding down wherever. Copper here kept me warm." He gestured to a roan gelding in the nearest stall, a handsome horse with a white blaze down his face. "I was just about to get some breakfast at the cafe down the street. You should come along, get something hot in you." "I couldn't impose any further on your generosity." "It's not an imposition if I'm offering." He studied her face for a moment. "Have you figured out what you're going to do?" The question she had been avoiding since she woke up. Olivia shook her head slowly. "I need to find work, but I don't know where to start. I thought I had a position waiting for me when I came here, but that fell through, and now I'm not sure what my options are." Finn was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Can you cook?" "Yes, quite well, actually. My grandmother insisted I learn all the domestic arts." "Can you handle basic doctoring, sewing up cuts, treating fevers, that sort of thing?" "I've had some experience with that as well. I helped care for my grandmother in her final illness, and before that I sometimes assisted the local doctor in our town." Finn nodded, seeming to make up his mind about something. "The Morrison Ranch where I work, they've been looking for someone to help out at the main house. Mrs. Morrison's getting on in years and the work is getting to be too much for her. She needs someone who can cook for the ranch hands, help with cleaning and washing, maybe tend to minor injuries when the men get banged up. It's hard work and the pay's not grand, but it comes with room and board, and the Morrisons are good people." Hope flared in Olivia's chest, bright and painful. "Do you really think they would consider me?" "I can take you out there today if you want, introduce you proper. I was heading back this morning anyway, just need to load up the supplies I bought yesterday." He paused, then added, "I won't promise anything for sure, but I know they need help, and you seem capable." "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I don't know how I can ever repay you for your kindness." "Call me Finn, and like I said, no repayment needed. Now let's get you some breakfast before we head out." The cafe was warm and smelled of coffee and bacon, and Olivia realized she had not had a proper meal in over a day. Finn ordered them both the full breakfast, eggs and bacon and potatoes and thick slices of bread with butter, and watched with satisfaction as she ate. "You've got to keep your strength up," he said when she tried to protest the expense. "It's a 2-hour ride to the ranch, and you look like you could use a good meal." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Finn asked, "What brought you all the way out to Nebraska? Family?" Olivia explained about her cousin's letter, the promised seamstress position, her arrival to discover Margaret had moved on. "I should have written ahead to confirm, but I was so eager to leave Ohio that I just packed up and came. My grandmother died and left me a little money, enough for the journey and a bit extra, and I thought this would be a fresh start. I grew up being told I would marry well and be taken care of, but the man I was supposed to marry decided he preferred my friend Sarah instead, and after that I realized I did not want to wait around hoping some man would choose me. I wanted to make my own way." "That took courage," Finn said, and the respect in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. "Or foolishness. I'm not sure which yet. Maybe both. The brave and the foolish are often the same folks, just seen from different angles." He smiled, and Olivia felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with breakfast. "But I think you'll do all right. You've got spine. Anyone can see that." After breakfast, they returned to the stable where Finn had already loaded his supplies into a wagon. He helped her up onto the seat, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. Copper was tied to the back, along with another horse Finn explained he had bought for the ranch. As they rolled out of Valentine into the open prairie, Olivia got her first real look at Nebraska in daylight. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, vast and empty under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Snow still clung to the ground in patches, and the wind that had seemed so hostile last night now felt clean and sharp, smelling of grass and distance and possibility. Finn pointed out landmarks as they rode, a creek that flooded every spring, A stand of cottonwoods where antelope liked to shelter, the ruins of a homestead that had been abandoned when the couple who built it got discouraged and moved back east. He talked about the weather, the cattle, the price of beef, and Olivia found herself relaxing beside him, lulled by his easy conversation and the rhythm of the wagon. "How long have you worked for the Morrisons?" she asked after a while. "Going on 6 years now. I started when I was 19, just a green kid who barely knew one end of a cow from the other. Mr. Morrison took a chance on me, taught me the work, and I've been there ever since. They're like family to me now." He glanced at her. "They've got a daughter about your age, Sarah Morrison. She's married to a rancher up north, got 3 kids now. Mrs. Morrison misses her something fierce. I think she'll be glad to have another young woman around the place." The Morrison Ranch appeared on the horizon like a miracle, a collection of buildings centered around a large 2-story house painted white with green shutters. There was a barn, several corrals, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various other structures Olivia could not identify. Cattle dotted the distant hills, dark shapes against the pale winter grass. As they pulled into the yard, a man emerged from the barn. He was in his 50s, with silver hair and a weathered face that broke into a smile when he saw Finn. "Fletcher, about time you got back. We were starting to think you'd gotten lost in town." "Just took a little longer than expected, Mr. Morrison." Finn jumped down from the wagon and turned to help Olivia descend. "I brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Miss Olivia Ashford. She's looking for work, and I thought she might be just what Mrs. Morrison was hoping for." Mr. Morrison's expression turned curious as he looked at Olivia. She felt herself being assessed, and she straightened her spine and met his gaze directly. "Is that so? What makes you think so?" Finn explained the situation, carefully omitting the more mortifying details about her midnight eviction, simply stating that Olivia was new to Valentine and looking for employment. She can cook, clean, do basic medical care. Came west to make her own way. Mr. Morrison listened carefully, then nodded. "Well, let's go see what Martha thinks. She's the one who needs the help, after all." He led them into the house, which was warm and clean and smelled of bread baking. The kitchen was large and bright, with a big cast-iron stove and windows that looked out over the prairie. A woman stood at the counter kneading dough, her gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked up as they entered, and Olivia saw kind eyes in a face lined with years of sun and wind. "Martha, this is Miss Olivia Ashford. Finn thinks she might be the help you've been looking for." Mrs. Morrison wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and came closer, studying Olivia with the same careful assessment her husband had used. "Is that right? What experience do you have, dear?" Olivia explained her background, her grandmother's training, her work helping the local doctor. She was honest about her limited experience, but emphasized her willingness to learn and work hard. "Can you cook for 20 hungry ranch hands 3 times a day?" "I've never cooked for that many at once, but I'm a fast learner and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Can you do laundry without ruining good work shirts?" "Yes, madam. My grandmother was very particular about proper washing and care of garments." "Can you handle men who track mud into my clean kitchen and think it's funny?" Olivia met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I suspect I can handle most anything if given the chance to try." Mrs. Morrison's stern expression cracked into a smile. "I like you. You've got spirit. When can you start?" Relief and joy flooded through Olivia so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Immediately, if you'll have me." "Good. The pay is $25 a month plus room and board. You'll have a room in the house, meals with us, and 1 day off each week. The work starts before dawn and doesn't finish until after dinner is cleaned up. It's hard and it's long, but I'll teach you everything you need to know, and I promise to be patient while you learn." "That's more than generous, Mrs. Morrison. Thank you." Olivia had to blink back tears for the second time in 12 hours, but these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. "Well then, let's get you settled. Robert, have one of the boys bring Miss Ashford's bag from the wagon. Finn, you go ahead and unload those supplies. Miss Ashford, you come with me and I'll show you your room." As Mrs. Morrison led her up the stairs, Olivia glanced back and caught Finn watching her. He smiled, and she smiled back, mouthing a silent thank you. He nodded and turned away, and she followed Mrs. Morrison down a hallway lined with family photographs. Her room was small but clean, with a real bed covered in a quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was the nicest room Olivia had ever had to herself, and she stood in the doorway feeling overwhelmed by the sudden reversal of her fortune. "I know it's not fancy," Mrs. Morrison said, misreading her silence. "It's perfect," Olivia said softly. "It's more than I could have hoped for." Mrs. Morrison patted her arm. "Well, get yourself unpacked and freshened up. Come down to the kitchen in about 30 minutes and I'll start showing you around and explaining how things work here." Alone in her new room, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the last 24 hours. From the boarding house door slamming in her face to this clean, warm room with the promise of honest work and a fresh start. And all because a cowboy she had never met had seen her crying on a frozen street and decided to help. She thought about Finn Fletcher, his quiet kindness, his easy way of talking, the warmth in his brown eyes. She told herself not to read anything into it, that he had simply done a good deed for someone in need. But she could not quite forget the way he had looked at her in the cafe, or how safe she had felt sitting beside him on the wagon ride out here. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and learning. Mrs. Morrison was a patient teacher, showing Olivia how to manage the large kitchen, how to plan meals for hungry men who worked from dawn to dusk, how to stretch supplies and make economical use of everything. Olivia learned to cook beef in a dozen different ways, to make bread in quantities that seemed impossible, to judge when beans were done and how much coffee to brew and how to keep everything hot and ready when the men came in from their work. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings when the men ate quickly and headed out to their various tasks, the midday meal that had to be ready precisely when they came in for their break, the evening dinners when they ate more slowly and talked about the day's work. She learned their names and their preferences, who liked their coffee black and who wanted extra sugar, who needed larger portions and who had a sweet tooth. And she learned to watch for Finn. He came in with the other hands for meals, always polite, always thanking her for the food. Sometimes he lingered after the others had left, helping her clear plates or carrying heavy pots of water. They talked while they worked. Easy conversations about small things, and Olivia found herself looking forward to those moments more than she cared to admit. "You're settling in well," he said one evening, about 3 weeks after she had arrived. He was drying dishes while she washed, the kitchen empty except for the two of them. "Thanks to you. I still can't believe how everything worked out." "You're the one doing the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." He set down the dish he was drying and looked at her seriously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. That night I found you on the street, you were crying. I've seen you work yourself near to exhaustion these past weeks, but I've never seen you cry again. Where does all that sadness go?" The question caught her off guard with its insight. She paused, her hands still in the dishwater. "I don't know. I suppose I'm too busy to be sad now, or maybe I'm just not sad anymore. I have a purpose here, work that matters, people who depend on me. That's more than I had before." "You had people depending on you before, didn't you? Your grandmother?" "That was different. That was obligation, duty. This is choice." She looked at him, trying to explain something she barely understood herself. "When my grandmother was dying, she told me I needed to find a husband quickly, that a woman alone in the world was vulnerable and doomed to failure. She made me promise I would try. But I didn't want to spend my life waiting to be chosen, hoping someone would decide I was good enough. So I came west to prove I could make my own way, and now I am. That makes me happy, not sad." Finn smiled. "Your grandmother sounds like she meant well, but I'm glad you didn't listen to her. You're too stubborn and capable to just wait around for someone to take care of you." "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know how to give." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something warm and promising. Olivia felt her heart beat faster, felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the hot dishwater. For a moment she thought he might say something more, might reach across the small space between them, but then they heard footsteps on the porch and Mrs. Morrison came bustling in with an empty water pitcher. "Oh, good, you're both still here. Finn, would you mind bringing up another bucket of water from the well? And Olivia, dear, I need your help with something in the pantry." The moment broke, and they went back to their separate tasks, but Olivia caught Finn's eye as he headed outside and saw her own feelings reflected there. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had named yet, but both of them felt. March came with warmer weather and longer days. The snow melted, turning the prairie into a sea of mud that made everything harder. Cattle needed checking, fences needed mending, and everyone worked longer hours. Olivia adapted to the increased pace, waking earlier to have breakfast ready when the men needed it, packing midday meals they could take with them when they were working too far from the house to return. She saw less of Finn during those busy weeks, which made the moments they did have together feel more precious. Once he came in late for dinner, exhausted and covered in mud, and she heated up the food she had saved for him and sat with him while he ate. He told her about spending the entire day pulling a cow and her newborn calf out of a bog, the satisfaction of getting them both out alive and well. "You care about them," she observed. "The animals, I mean. It's not just work for you." "Of course I care about them. They're living things depending on us to take care of them right. Besides, there's something honest about working with animals and land. They don't lie or pretend to be something they're not." He paused, then added, "Not like people sometimes." "Have people lied to you often?" "Often enough to appreciate honesty when I find it." He looked at her directly. "You're honest, Olivia. I noticed that right away. You don't pretend things are fine when they're not. And you don't try to be something you're not. I don't have the energy to pretend. Life takes enough effort as it is without adding lies to the mix." He laughed at that, and the sound made her smile. She loved his laugh, deep and genuine and rare enough to feel like a gift when she heard it. One Sunday afternoon, her day off, Finn found her sitting on the porch reading a book she had borrowed from Mrs. Morrison's small collection. He was dressed in clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and he looked younger somehow, less burdened. "I'm riding into town for supplies. Want to come along? You've been here over a month and haven't left the ranch once except that first day." Olivia hesitated. She had avoided Valentine since arriving at the ranch, not wanting to risk running into Mrs. Henderson or anyone else who might judge her for that midnight eviction. But the thought of a few hours away from the ranch, a few hours in Finn's company, was too tempting to resist. "I'd like that." They took the wagon, the same one they had ridden in that first day. The weather was beautiful, warm enough that Olivia did not need her heavy coat, and the prairie had started to green up with the first hints of spring. Wildflowers were beginning to bloom in scattered patches, adding spots of yellow and purple to the endless grass. Finn drove with one hand. The other arm stretched along the back of the seat behind her, not quite touching, but close enough that she was constantly aware of his presence. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they had read, places they had been, dreams they had dreamed. She learned he had grown up in Kansas, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come to Nebraska looking for work after his father died and the family farm had to be sold. "Do you miss them? Your family?" "Sometimes, but we write letters and I see them every couple of years when I can get time off. They're doing all right, all of them. My oldest brother runs a freight business in Kansas City, doing real well for himself. The middle 2 are working on a ranch in Colorado. We're spread out, but we're making our ways in the world, which is what Pa would have wanted." "It must be nice having brothers. I was an only child, and after my parents died when I was 8, it was just my grandmother and me. Sometimes I wished for siblings, someone to share things with. It had its good points and its bad. Lots of fighting over stupid things when we were kids, but also always someone on your side when you needed it." He glanced at her. "You've had a hard road, losing your parents so young and then your grandmother. Everyone has losses. Mine aren't special. They're special to you, though. That's what matters." They reached Valentine in the early afternoon, and Finn parked the wagon near the general store. As they walked inside together, Olivia felt eyes on them and knew what people must be thinking. A young woman and a young man, unmarried, arriving together on her day off. She lifted her chin and ignored the stares, refusing to be ashamed of something innocent. Finn conducted his business efficiently, purchasing flour and sugar and coffee and various other supplies the ranch needed. Olivia browsed the store, admiring pretty fabrics she could not afford, and a set of hair combs that caught the light beautifully. She was looking at a display of ribbons when she heard a familiar voice behind her. Well, well, Miss Ashford, still in Valentine after all. She turned to find Mrs. Henderson standing there, looking her up and down with obvious disapproval. Mrs. Henderson, good afternoon. I see you found somewhere to land after I had to let you go. I heard you were working as a cook at the Morrison Ranch. Rather a step down from seamstress work, isn't it? Honest work is honest work, no matter what form it takes, Olivia said evenly, though her hands clenched at her sides. Honest work, yes. Though I do wonder about the honesty of a young woman who goes riding into town with one of the ranch hands on her day off. People might get the wrong impression. Before Olivia could respond, Finn appeared at her side. He had clearly heard Mrs. Henderson's comment, and his face had gone hard. The only wrong impression here is the one you're trying to create, Mrs. Henderson. Miss Ashford is a respectable woman doing respectable work, and if you've got a problem with her riding into town with me, that says more about your mind than it does about either of us. Mrs. Henderson drew herself up, affronted. Well, I was only concerned for the young lady's reputation. Her reputation is just fine, and it would stay that way if people like you kept your gossip to yourself. Finn's voice was level, but firm. Now if you'll excuse us, we have shopping to finish. He took Olivia's elbow and steered her toward the counter, leaving Mrs. Henderson sputtering behind them. Olivia found herself shaking, not from fear, but from anger and something else. A fierce gratitude for Finn's defense of her. Thank you, she said quietly as he loaded supplies into a crate. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I can't stand people like her thinking they have the right to judge others based on nothing but their own narrow views. He paused in his work to look at her. Your reputation is important, Olivia. If riding into town with me causes you problems, I can make sure we come separately from now on. No. The word came out more forcefully than she intended. I won't let people like Mrs. Henderson dictate how I live my life. I'm done apologizing for existing. He smiled at that, and she saw approval in his eyes. Good. They finished the shopping and loaded everything into the wagon. As they prepared to leave, Finn surprised her by steering them toward the cafe where they had eaten breakfast that first morning. We've got time for a meal before we head back, unless you'd rather not, after what happened with Mrs. Henderson. I'd love to. She said it firmly, refusing to let her fear of gossip control her actions. Over lunch, Finn told her stories about ranch life, funny incidents with stubborn cattle and temperamental horses. She laughed more than she had in months, maybe years, and realized how much she enjoyed his company, how comfortable she felt with him. There was no pretension with Finn, no need to be anyone other than herself. As they ate, she noticed he was watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Finally, he set down his fork and said, I need to tell you something. All right. I can't stop thinking about you. The words came out in a rush, as though he had been holding them back for a long time. I know I shouldn't say that. I know it's not proper, but I'm not good at pretending. Ever since that night I found you on the street, you've been in my thoughts. The way you handled yourself with such dignity even when you were scared and alone. The way you work so hard without complaining. The way you laugh at my stupid jokes. I've come to care for you, Olivia, more than I probably should given how little time we've known each other. Her heart was racing now. Joy and fear tangled together. Finn. You don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know. If it makes things awkward, I'll keep my distance, but I couldn't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel. It doesn't make things awkward, she said softly. It makes things honest. And I value honesty. She took a breath, gathering her courage. I care for you too. I have for a while now. I didn't want to admit it because everything is still so new and uncertain, but when Mrs. Henderson was saying those things and you defended me, I realized I didn't just care about you as a friend. I care about you as someone I could love, given time. The smile that spread across Finn's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. Given time? Well, we've only known each other 6 weeks. That's hardly long enough to declare undying devotion. I've known men who married women they courted for 2 weeks and had happy marriages for 50 years. Time isn't always the most important thing. What is then? Knowing what you want and being brave enough to reach for it. He reached across the table and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. I know what I want, Olivia Ashford. The question is, do you? She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. This man who had given her his room and slept in the cold, who had brought her to the ranch and vouched for her, who had defended her to Mrs. Henderson and now sat before her offering his heart. She thought about her grandmother's warnings, about the need for caution and propriety, and then she thought about what she had told Finn about making her own choices. I want the same thing you do, she said, but I also want to do this right. I have a job now, a good position, and I don't want to risk it by being careless. If we're going to court properly, we need to be respectful of the Morrisons and their rules. Agreed. I'll speak to Mr. Morrison as soon as we get back, ask his permission to court you formally, and we'll do everything proper and above board so no one can say we've acted shamefully. They smiled at each other like conspirators, hands still clasped across the table, and Olivia felt something settle in her chest that she had not felt since her parents died. She felt like she belonged somewhere, to someone, like she had found a place in the world that was hers by choice rather than by obligation or necessity. The ride back to the ranch was different from the ride into town. They sat closer together now, and when Finn's arm settled around her shoulders, she leaned into him naturally. They talked about the future, about what courtship might look like for two people who both worked long hours on the same ranch. He promised to find time for walks in the evening after dinner was finished, for more trips into town on her days off, for sitting together on the porch in the brief windows of free time they could carve out. I'm not a rich man, he said, as the ranch came into view. I make decent wages, but I don't have much saved. It'll be a while before I can offer you a proper home of your own. I don't need a proper home. I need honesty and kindness and partnership. Everything else is just details. You say that now, but what about when you're older and want children and a place of your own? Then we'll work towards those things together. That's what partners do, isn't it? Face the future as a team rather than alone. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the barn and turned to look at her fully. How did I get so lucky as to find you that night? I think we both got lucky. She squeezed his hand. Now go talk to Mr. Morrison before I lose my nerve and decide to play it safe. True to his word, Finn sought out Mr. Morrison as soon as they had unloaded the supplies. Olivia retreated to the kitchen where Mrs. Morrison was starting preparations for supper, trying not to think about what was being said in Mr. Morrison's office. You look like you've got something on your mind, Mrs. Morrison observed, as Olivia began peeling potatoes with more force than necessary. Finn is speaking with Mr. Morrison about courting me. Properly, I mean, with permission. Mrs. Morrison's face broke into a delighted smile. Well, it's about time. Robert and I were wondering when Finn would work up the courage to say something. We've seen the way you two look at each other when you think no one's watching. You have? Olivia felt her cheeks heat. I thought we were being discreet. Dear girl, when two young people are falling in love, they're never as discreet as they think they are, Mrs. Morrison came over and patted her shoulder. Finn is a good man, one of the best we've had work here. If Robert approves the courtship, which I'm certain he will, you'll have my blessing as well. 20 minutes later, Finn appeared in the kitchen doorway with a grin that answered Olivia's question before he spoke. Mr. Morrison said yes. We can court properly with the understanding that we're both still expected to do our jobs and that there will be no impropriety under his roof. Of course, Olivia said, trying to sound dignified even as joy bubbled up inside her. We would never be improper. Never, Finn agreed solemnly, though his eyes danced with amusement. Mrs. Morrison shooed him out of the kitchen so Olivia could focus on her work, but the older woman was smiling as she did so. Olivia finished preparing supper in a daze of happiness, barely able to believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. That evening, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen cleaned, Finn knocked on the back door and asked if she would like to take a walk. They strolled around the ranch yard as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. He told her about his dreams of saving enough money to buy his own piece of land someday, maybe starting with just a few cattle and building from there. "Would you want to keep ranching?" she asked, "or would you try something else?" "Ranching is all I really know, and I like the work. But I'd want to do it my way, trying some of the newer methods I've been reading about. Rotating pastures, improving bloodlines, maybe even trying some farming alongside the cattle." He glanced at her. "What about you? What do you dream about for your future?" "Honestly, I never let myself dream much before. I was so focused on just surviving, on meeting my grandmother's expectations and not being a burden, that I didn't think about what I actually wanted." She paused, considering. "But I think I'd like a family. Not a huge one necessarily, but children and a home that feels warm and safe. A place where people can be themselves without fear of judgment." "That sounds good to me." They had reached the fence line at the edge of the ranch yard, and Finn stopped, turning to face her. The last light of the day illuminated his face, highlighting the planes and angles she had come to know so well. "Olivia, I know we're just starting this courtship, and I know there's a lot we still don't know about each other, but I want you to know that I'm serious about this, about you. I'm not looking for something temporary or casual. When I court someone, it's with the intention of marriage, if we suit." "That's what I want too," she said softly. "I'm done being cautious and careful and afraid. You make me want to be brave." He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "You're already the bravest person I know. You just didn't realize it yet." They stood there for a long moment, not quite touching, but close enough that Olivia could feel the warmth radiating from his body. She wanted him to kiss her, realized with a small shock that she had been wanting it for weeks now, but she also knew they had promised the Morrisons they would be proper. So instead, she stepped back slightly and smiled. "We should head in. I need to start the bread dough for tomorrow's breakfast." "Always working," he said, but his tone was admiring rather than critical. He walked her back to the house, and at the door, he took her hand and raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth racing up her arm. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Finn." The courtship began in earnest after that. They found stolen moments throughout the day to talk, to share smiles across the crowded dinner table, to brush hands when passing in doorways. On Sundays, they went for longer walks, exploring the ranch lands and the creek that ran through the property. Finn taught her to recognize different types of grasses and wildflowers, showed her where antelope liked to graze, and where eagles nested in the tall cottonwoods. She learned that he was patient and thoughtful, that he listened more than he talked, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. She learned that he was respected by the other ranch hands not just for his skill but for his fairness, that he never asked anyone to do work he would not do himself, that he could settle disputes without raising his voice. He learned that she was fiercely independent and stubbornly determined, that she took pride in her work and hated admitting when she needed help. He learned that she had a temper when provoked but was quick to forgive, that she loved reading and could lose herself in books for hours, that she sang while she worked when she thought no one could hear. They learned each other's histories, the painful parts and the joyful ones. She told him about her parents' deaths in a carriage accident, about growing up under her strict grandmother's care, about the loneliness of being the only child in a house of mourning. He told her about his father's slow decline from a war injury, about helping his mother hold the family together as their circumstances got harder, about the relief mixed with grief when his father finally died and the struggle was over. "Do you think that makes us terrible people?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Being relieved when someone dies? No, I think it makes us human. Watching someone suffer is its own kind of torture, and wanting it to end doesn't mean you love them less. It means you love them enough to want their peace more than your own comfort. His understanding of complicated emotions, his ability to see the truth beneath the surface, made her love him more with each passing day. Because it was love now, she could admit that to herself even if she had not yet said the words aloud. She loved the way he looked at her, the way he made her laugh, the way he never tried to change her or make her smaller. She loved his strength and his gentleness, his ambition and his contentment with simple things. April turned to May, and the prairie exploded with wildflowers. The cattle grew fat on spring grass, and the work remained constant but rewarding. Olivia had been at the ranch for 3 months now, had been officially courting Finn for 6 weeks, and she could not imagine her life any other way. One Sunday afternoon, Finn drove her into town again, but this time, instead of going to the general store, he took her to a small jewelry shop she had not noticed before. The proprietor greeted Finn by name, and Olivia realized this visit had been planned. "I want to buy you something," Finn said, gesturing to the display of rings and necklaces and brooches. "Not an engagement ring yet, we're not quite there, but something that shows you're being courted, that you're spoken for." "Finn, you don't need to spend your money on jewelry for me." "I know I don't need to. I want to." He looked at her seriously. "Please let me do this. I don't have much to offer you yet, but I can offer you this." She relented, touched by his insistence, and they looked through the display together. She avoided the expensive pieces, knowing how hard he worked for every dollar, until her eyes fell on a simple silver locket on a delicate chain. It was beautiful, without being ostentatious, the kind of thing she could wear every day. "That one," she said, pointing. Finn purchased it without hesitation, and the jeweler offered to engrave it if they wanted to wait. Finn looked at Olivia, and she nodded. They agreed on just their initials, F and O intertwined, and the jeweler promised it would be ready in an hour. They spent that hour walking around Valentine, and this time Olivia did not care who saw them or what anyone thought. She held Finn's arm openly, laughed at his jokes without restraint, and felt more herself than she had in her entire life. When they returned to collect the locket, Finn fastened it around her neck himself, his fingers warm against her skin. She touched it gently, feeling the weight of it, the promise it represented. "Thank you," she said. "I'll treasure it always." "I hope you'll have more to treasure before long," he said quietly. "I'm saving as much as I can, Olivia. By fall, I should have enough put aside to at least make a start on our own place, even if it's just a small cabin and a few head of cattle." "You're thinking about proposing?" Her heart beat faster at the thought. "I've been thinking about it since the day I met you, but I want to do it right, want to be able to offer you a real future, not just a hope and a prayer." "The hope and the prayer would be enough for me." "Maybe, but they're not enough for me. You deserve more than just scraping by." She wanted to argue that she did not need wealth or luxury, just love and partnership, but she could see the determination in his face and knew this was important to him. So instead she kissed his cheek, quick and chaste, and said, "Then I'll wait, but not forever." "Not forever," he agreed, "just until fall." Summer came with its heat and long days. The work intensified as cattle needed to be moved to higher pastures, fences repaired, and preparations made for the fall roundup. Finn was gone more often now, sometimes for days at a time when the men had to camp out on the range. Olivia missed him fiercely during those absences, but the joy of his return made the separation worthwhile. They were careful to maintain propriety, aware that their every action was observed by the ranch hands and the Morrisons. But in private moments, stolen kisses became more frequent, more passionate. Finn's hands would cup her face as he kissed her behind the barn after evening chores, and Olivia would press closer, wanting more even as she knew they had to wait. "You're making this very difficult," he murmured one evening in August, his forehead resting against hers as they both struggled to catch their breath. "I'm not doing anything," she protested. "You're being you, which is more than enough." He stepped back, putting distance between them with visible effort. "But we promised to do this right, and I won't break that promise no matter how much I want to." His restraint made her love him even more, even as it frustrated her. They were both adults, both committed to each other, but they were also dependent on the Morrisons' goodwill and bound by the social expectations of their time. So they waited, and they dreamed, and they counted down the days until Finn thought he would have saved enough to make their future real. In September, Finn asked Mr. Morrison for a private conversation. Olivia knew what it was about, had seen Finn counting his savings with increasing satisfaction, had noticed him looking at her with a particular intensity lately. She tried to work normally that afternoon, preparing supper and cleaning the kitchen, but her hands shook as she kneaded bread dough. Mrs. Morrison noticed and smiled knowingly. "He's asking Robert about marriage, isn't he?" "I think so. He said he would, once he had enough saved." "And what will you say when he asks?" "Yes." There was no hesitation, no doubt. "I'll say yes." That evening, after supper was finished and the kitchen cleaned, Finn asked her to walk with him. She grabbed her shawl against the cooling evening air and followed him out into the twilight. He led her away from the ranch buildings, out to a small rise where they could see the prairie stretching in all directions, painted gold by the setting sun. "I spoke to Mr. Morrison today," he began, taking both her hands in his. "I told him I want to marry you, and I asked for his blessing since you're under his protection while you work here. He gave it, and he even made me an offer I didn't expect." "What kind of offer?" "There's a section of land at the northern edge of the Morrison Ranch, about 300 acres. It's been sitting unused because it's too far from the main operation to manage efficiently. Mr. Morrison said if I want it, I can buy it from him at a fair price, paying it off over time with my wages. He'll help me get started, selling me some cattle at cost and lending me equipment until I can afford my own. It would be ours, Olivia. Not much at first, but ours." Tears filled her eyes at the generosity, at the opportunity being offered. "That's wonderful, Finn." "It is, but it's also hard work and years of struggle before we'd be really established. I can build us a cabin this winter, get it ready by spring, and we could marry then if you're willing. But I need to be honest about what I'm offering. It won't be easy, especially the first few years." "I never wanted easy. I wanted real." She squeezed his hands. "Yes, Finn. Yes to all of it. The land, the struggle, the future we'll build together. Yes." He pulled her close and kissed her properly then, deep and thorough and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and laughed. "I don't have a ring yet. I was so focused on getting the money for the land that I didn't think about a ring. I don't need a ring. I have the locket you gave me and I have your promise. That's enough." "You'll have a ring?" he said firmly. "Maybe not right away, but you'll have one. I want everyone to know you're mine." "I've been yours since that night you found me on the street," she said softly. "The ring will just make it official." They stood on that hill until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming dreams. They would marry in April, after the spring thaw made travel easier and before the busy summer season began. Finn would spend the winter building their cabin whenever weather and ranch work permitted. Olivia would continue working at the main house until the wedding, saving every penny of her wages toward furniture and supplies they would need. "What about children?" Finn asked as they finally started walking back toward the ranch. "Do you want them right away, or would you rather wait until we're more established?" "I want them when they come," Olivia said. "I don't think life waits for us to be ready. We just have to be willing to face whatever comes. Then we'll face it together." The engagement was announced the next day, and the entire ranch celebrated. The hands who had worked with Finn for years clapped him on the back and teased him about finally getting the courage to propose. Mrs. Morrison hugged Olivia and immediately began planning the wedding, insisting they would hold it at the ranch and that she would help with the cooking and preparations. That fall and winter were a blur of activity. Finn worked on the cabin whenever he could, with help from other ranch hands on their days off. Olivia visited the site whenever possible, watching the walls go up, the roof take shape, the windows and door installed. It was small, just 3 rooms, a main room with a kitchen area, a bedroom, and a small storage room, but it was solid and well built, and Finn had oriented it so the windows caught the morning sun. "What do you think?" he asked one Sunday afternoon in February as they stood inside the nearly finished cabin. Their breath puffed white in the cold air, but the stove he had installed would warm it nicely once it was lit. "I think it's perfect," she said honestly. "I think it's the beginning of everything we hoped for." He pulled her close, wrapping them both in his heavy coat. "2 more months and you'll be my wife." 2 more months, she echoed, and the waiting felt almost unbearable. But the time did pass, marked by finishing touches on the cabin, by Olivia sewing curtains and quilts, by Finn building furniture with his own hands. They ordered supplies from town, simple plates and cups, pots and pans, blankets and linens. Mrs. Morrison insisted on giving them some things from her own stores, flour and sugar and coffee and other staples to get them started. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in April, timed to coincide with a natural break in ranch work. Invitations were sent to Finn's family in Kansas and Colorado, and to Olivia's surprise, 2 of his brothers managed to make the journey west to attend. She had no family to invite, which saddened her until Mrs. Morrison squeezed her hand and said, "We're your family now, dear." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and warm, the prairie covered with spring wildflowers. Olivia dressed in the best dress she owned, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Morrison had helped her alter to fit better. She pinned her hair up carefully and fastened the silver locket around her neck, touching it for luck. When she walked downstairs, she found the house transformed. Flowers decorated every surface, and chairs had been set up in the large front room for guests. The circuit preacher had arrived the day before, a kind older man who had agreed to perform the ceremony. Ranch hands in their best clothes milled around nervously, clearly uncomfortable but determined to witness Finn's wedding. Finn waited at the front of the room, and when he saw her, his face lit with such joy that Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. He looked handsome in a new shirt and vest, his hair trimmed and his face freshly shaved. His brother stood beside him, and she could see the family resemblance in their features. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever came. Finn's voice was steady and sure, and Olivia's only shook a little. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Finn kissed her with more restraint than he probably felt, aware of their audience, but his eyes promised more for later. The celebration afterward was joyful and loud. Mrs. Morrison had outdone herself with the food, and there was even a small cake decorated with wildflowers. The ranch hands gave them practical gifts, tools, and supplies they would need for their new home. Mr. Morrison pulled Finn aside and gave him an envelope which Olivia later learned contained the deed to their land, the first payment already credited. As the sun began to set, Finn and Olivia said their goodbyes and rode out to their own cabin, their own land, their own future. They had loaded a wagon earlier with all their belongings, everything they owned in the world, which still was not much but felt like everything. The cabin was warm when they arrived, and Olivia realized someone, probably Mrs. Morrison, had come earlier to light the stove and leave food warming for them. There were fresh flowers on the table, and the bed was made with the quilt she had sewn through the winter. "Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher," Finn said, lifting her easily in his arms and carrying her over the threshold. "Welcome home," she echoed, and kissed him. That night they came together as husband and wife, tentative at first, and then with growing confidence and passion. Finn was gentle and patient, and Olivia found that the joy of being with him far exceeded any embarrassment or uncertainty. Afterward, they lay tangled together in their own bed in their own home and talked quietly about the future. "Do you ever think about that night I found you?" Finn asked, stroking her hair. "How different everything could have been." "All the time. If you had walked down a different street, if you had not stopped to help a stranger, if you had not given me your room." She pressed a kiss to his chest. "I think that was the luckiest night of my life, even though it did not feel lucky at the time." "Mine too," I was meant to find you, Olivia. I really believe that. Then we were both very lucky. She yawned, exhausted from the long day and the emotion of it all. What do we do tomorrow? Tomorrow we start our real life, tending our cattle, building our ranch, making our future. He kissed the top of her head. Tomorrow we start the rest of forever. She fell asleep in his arms, safe and loved, and home at last. The first years of their marriage were everything Finn had warned her about. Hard work, long days, setbacks and struggles. But they were also filled with joy and satisfaction and love that grew deeper with each passing season. They worked side by side, Olivia learning to ride and help with the cattle, Finn learning to cook passable meals when she was sick. They made mistakes and learned from them, celebrated small victories, and endured disappointments together. Their first son was born in the winter of 1884. A healthy boy they named William after Finn's father. Olivia labored through a long night with Mrs. Morrison attending her, and when Finn was finally allowed into the room to meet his son, he cried tears of joy and wonder. "He's perfect," he kept saying, holding the tiny bundle with extreme care. "Olivia, he's perfect." "He's ours," she corrected, though she agreed with the sentiment. William was followed by a daughter 2 years later, Emma, who had her mother's auburn hair and her father's brown eyes. 2 more sons came after that, James and Thomas, born 18 months apart and inseparable from birth. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Finn's careful management and willingness to try new methods paid off, and they gradually expanded their herd and their land. They built additions onto the cabin as their family grew, turning it from 3 rooms to 6, adding a proper porch and a room for the boys to share. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Finn surprised Olivia with the ring he had promised all those years ago. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond. "I wanted you to have this," he said, slipping it onto her finger. "I know I said you would get a ring eventually, and I always meant to keep that promise." "You've kept every promise you ever made me," Olivia said, admiring how the stone caught the light, "but this one might be my favorite." They stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. William was 10 now, tall and responsible, already helping with the ranch work. Emma was 8, bright and curious, always asking questions. James and Thomas were still small, 6 and 5, getting into everything and making Olivia laugh with their antics. "Do you ever regret it?" Finn asked, his arm around her waist. "Saying yes to all this? The hard work, the struggle?" "Never. Not for a single moment." She leaned against him, comfortable and content. "Do you?" "Not a chance. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Fletcher. You and those 4 troublemakers out there." They watched the sun set over their land, their home, their life together. It had been 12 years since that cold February night when Finn had found her standing alone on a dark street with nowhere to go. 12 years since he had given her his room and changed both their lives forever. Olivia touched the locket she still wore every day, feeling the familiar weight of it against her heart. She had kept it all these years, even after getting the engagement ring and the wedding band. It was her first gift from Finn, the first symbol of his care for her, and she would treasure it always. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to look up at his face, still handsome even with the lines that the years and sun had added. "I love you too." He kissed her softly, a kiss full of familiarity and passion and promise. "Always have, always will." Inside the house, Emma called for help with something, and Thomas started crying about a scraped knee. The demands of family life pulled them back from their quiet moment, but they went together hand in hand to deal with whatever chaos awaited. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Olivia and Finn sat together on their porch one more time, looking at the stars that spread across the Nebraska sky like diamonds scattered on velvet. "Tell me again," Emma had asked earlier that evening, climbing into her mother's lap. "Tell me the story of how you and Papa met." So Olivia had told her, simplifying it for a child's ears but keeping the truth of it. about being alone and afraid, about a kind cowboy who helped a stranger, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things. That's romantic, Emma had sighed. And Olivia had laughed and kissed her daughter's forehead. Yes, it is. Very romantic. Now, sitting with Finn under the stars, Olivia thought about that story, about how far they had come from that cold February night. They had built a life together from almost nothing, had created a home and a family and a future through determination and love and faith in each other. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of spring flowers and distant rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and cattle moved restlessly in their pasture. The sounds of their land, their home. "What are you thinking about?" Finn asked, noting her pensive expression. "I'm thinking about how lucky we are. How lucky I am." She laced her fingers through his. "I came west looking for a fresh start, for a way to make my own life, and I found all that. But I found something better too. I found you. I found us." "We found each other," he corrected, "and we built something neither of us could have built alone." "Yes," she agreed, "we did." They sat there a while longer, content in each other's presence, before finally going inside to the home they had made, the life they had created, the love they had nurtured from that first cold night into something warm and lasting and true. In the bedroom, Olivia carefully removed her locket and set it on the dresser beside the lamp, next to Finn's pocket watch and her wedding ring, which she sometimes took off when doing heavy work. These small treasures, symbols of their life together. She thought again of Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, of that heavy door slamming shut, of standing alone in the dark with nowhere to go. She thought of Finn appearing out of that darkness like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to speak. She thought of all the moments since then, thousands of them strung together into the story of their marriage. "No regrets?" Finn asked again as they settled into bed, a question he asked sometimes as though he needed reassurance that she was truly happy. "None," she said firmly. "This life, this home, these children, you, it's everything I never knew I wanted, and I would not change a single moment of it." He pulled her close, her back to his chest, his arm around her waist in the familiar position they had slept in for 10 years. "I love you, Olivia." "I love you too, Finn. Always." And she did. She loved him in the morning when he woke before dawn to tend the cattle. She loved him in the afternoon when he came in for lunch with dirt under his nails and exhaustion in his eyes. She loved him in the evening when he swung Emma around until she shrieked with laughter, when he helped William with his reading, when he bandaged Thomas's scraped knee with exaggerated care to make the boy giggle through his tears. She loved him in the big moments and the small ones, in the struggles and the triumphs, in the ordinary days that made up a life. She loved him for seeing her on that dark street and deciding to help, for giving her his room and sleeping in the cold, for believing in her when she had stopped believing in herself. Their story had begun with an ending, with a door closing and a woman alone in the dark, but it had become something beautiful, something lasting. A love story written in prairie grass and cattle brands, in cabin walls built by hand, in children's laughter and shared dreams and quiet moments under the stars. Years later, when William was grown and bringing his own bride home to meet his parents, he would ask his mother how she and his father had met, and Olivia would tell him the truth, the whole story, about being thrown out at midnight and a cowboy who gave up his room. "That's quite a story," William would say. "You were lucky." "Yes," Olivia would agree, glancing at Finn across the room where he stood holding their newest grandchild. "We both were. Very, very lucky." But that was still years away. Tonight, in April of 1892, Olivia Fletcher fell asleep in her husband's arms, in the home they had built, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had created together. And if she dreamed, it was of that February night, of a tall cowboy with kind eyes saying, "You can have my room," and of saying yes to him then and every day since, Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly under the stars, wild and beautiful, and full of possibility, just like the life she and Finn had chosen, just like the love they had built from one moment of kindness into something that would last forever. The end came not with drama, but with contentment, with a woman and a man who had found each other at the worst possible moment and made from it the best possible life. With children growing strong and healthy, with land producing and thriving, with a marriage that had weathered every storm and emerged stronger for it, with love that had started on a cold February night and would last until their final breath and beyond, written in the children they raised, the land they tended, the life they built together from almost nothing into something extraordinary. And every year on their anniversary, Finn would fasten the silver locket around Olivia's neck and tell her again that finding her that night was the luckiest thing that ever happened to him. And she would smile and kiss him and agree, knowing with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly the person she was meant to be with, living exactly the life she was meant to live. Their story, born from hardship and kindness, had bloomed into something neither of them could have imagined that desperate night. And though they could not know it then, standing on that dark street with nothing but hope and fear between them, they had already found what they were looking for. They had found each other, and that was everything.